What's up, everybody, and welcome into the number one Group of Five college football podcast in the world. This is the Group of Five guys, and our mission is to be the voice for the Group of Five football programs, the voice that the mainstream sports media absolutely refuses to be. We need everybody's help to do that. We need you to follow us on all the social platforms at Group of Five guys. Go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your best podcasts. Subscribe to the channel, leave a 5-star rating and a review. Most importantly, tell your family and friends all about us. On this episode of Inside Drill, we've got the AAC Commissioner, Tim Pernetti, joining us. We're going to talk NIL, conference realignment, Tulane, Army, Navy, officials, and plenty more. Hope you enjoy the show. All right. Well, guys, we have reached maybe the pinnacle of this show. We have had players on the show. We've had coaches on the show, athletic directors on the show, and now we get many would argue the best Group of Five conference in the country. We get the commissioner of the American Conference, Tim Pernetti, joining us. Tim, can't thank you enough for coming on.
Very flattered at that introduction. Was feeling like best available talent for a while, but after that, you upped the game here. I'm really going to have to perform, but really excited to have the opportunity to talk to you guys. Thanks for the time.
Yes, sir. Well, we'll get started right away with just focusing on this season. And right now, it's shaking out. We got the committee meetings. You've got Army sitting there undefeated with a big non-conference coming up in a couple weeks. And then you've got Tulane sitting there undefeated in conference with some good games. What's your argument, I guess, for your champion making the playoff?
Well, our argument is going to be very, very succinct and very, very clear. Let's take Tulane as an example, and I think these are the two. You're absolutely right, are in the conversation. Tulane is one of those programs that I think people look at and say, okay, how did that happen? Right? They arrived at this point. How'd they get there? This is a university that has, in a very strategic way, brought athletics into the fabric of who they are as a university. And as part of that, they've made significant investment, and part of that investment is in talent. I think John Summerall, I hope John is in our league forever. I don't know if that's reality or not, but that has something to do with it as well. But the argument for Tulane is they have the guts to schedule. And if you look at what they've done out of conference, I think that's important. The pundits will all say the same thing, guys, which is, okay, well, they played Kansas State and lost. They played Oklahoma and lost. Fair, okay, but I don't know that everyone has the guts to schedule in a way like Tulane does. I think across the board, they are one of the most talented teams in the country, never mind in our conference. And I'm not sure there's a lot of programs, if they landed in the slot in the playoff, that would want to play them right now. So I think they have a lot going for them. On Army, I don't think we could have a more perfect storm as a conference. When you have a new member join, obviously everybody's rooting for each other to smoothly enter the world and have some success. What Army's done this year has been remarkable. And the reality is, in like a day and age like this, I think part of our pitch is going to be, everybody's talking about money. Everybody's talking about NIL. Everybody's talking about who transferred where to sort of like accelerate the growth. Army and the academies have to recruit a different kind of student athlete because there is no NIL. There is no transfer portal. It's probably a great AD job, by the way, because of those things. But I think what Army's done has been remarkable. They do have a tough stretch coming up. Not only Notre Dame, they get the benefit of the bye week going into Notre Dame, which is terrific. They've got Bryson Daly back, which is great. But the UTSA game is going to be a tough game. The beauty of our conference this year is we have multiple teams in the conversation in the middle of November. And when you're doing that in football, you're doing your job as a conference. But as you've seen with who's knocked off who in the middle of the season in our conference, it's not such a predictable place, which means we have great competition.
You brought up Army's stretch, and so this is top of my mind. It's been the top of my mind really since the announcement of Army joining the conference. I am a proponent of the Army-Navy game being played in the regular season, and I think Navy's lost a couple now, so it's not quite as big of a game as it may have been. But for that situation where both undefeated in conference at the time and both potentially making the playoff, is there any conversation behind closed doors about that game being moved and being a conference game?
Why are you a proponent of moving into the regular season? Tell me that.
Well, I think that let's just say they were both undefeated like they were going to be, and then they played. So if Army remains undefeated and beats Tulane in the conference championship, then they have another game. And there's like, to me, I could see the committee looking at that and saying, well, I don't know. They haven't beat their rival yet. Do we put them in, or do we risk? And then the other point of that is, if Army is put in, then I don't think a school like Army and Coach Monken would do this, the meaningfulness of that game. But hey, we got a national championship on the line. Do we rest Bryson Daly for the Navy game? Do we? That's kind of my thought on it. And I just think it would mean even more than it already means if it was, Thanksgiving weekend, conference championship on the line, playoff, berth on the line, along with the Commander-in-Chief trophy.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. It's a really interesting debate. What I would say to you too is, outside of like Army Tulane, we're talking about like Navy still got something to say about the conference championship.
No doubt.
And ironically, and I actually picked to go to Tulane Navy back in August. So I guess I had a little foresight into what was coming, but that's a huge game in our conference this weekend, and will determine a lot of what happens in the postseason. You said, with Navy having lost a couple of games, maybe it's a little bit of a different game. The Army-Navy game, I've been multiple times. It doesn't matter what everybody's record is. Like, Army-Navy is huge. Army-Navy is an institution. Army-Navy is a tradition. And the fact that it was moved years ago, ironically, by my predecessor, when Mike Oresco was the head of programming at CBS Sports, he spearheaded bringing that game to a week where they could isolate it and profile it the way it is now. And I think it deserves that. I don't see the Army-Navy game moving into the regular season. And as you guys may know this, we met as a CFP group. I actually didn't even started yet, but I was in the meeting in April where we talked about this issue. What if Army or Navy wins the American Conference Championship, is undefeated, and is selected to compete in the CFP, and then loses the next week in the Army-Navy game? How does that work? And what the commissioners all determined is that game will not have bearing because the selections will already have been made. Having said that, we also agreed that in a case like that, if that all happened as I spelled it out, we would evaluate, that procedure in the future. But, I don't see Army-Navy moving. I think the tradition of it, and you want to talk about a political storm, try moving the Army-Navy game into the regular season with all the people around those programs. Like, that could be one of the most immovable objects ever. Having said that, it does come up in the room with other commissioners as we look at the future, because, what I have shared with them is we decided this, and I told Army and Navy, the big obstacle, I think, for everyone psychologically is you could go undefeated through the conference championship and have played one less game. So you're being evaluated against teams that have played one more game. That could hurt you in the long term. They've come back to me and proposed the idea of adding a regular season game. So by the time you get to Selection Sunday, it's apples to apples. And that's something that is also on the table right now.
Well, Tim, appreciate that. That's a fair answer. I'm good with that. In this day and age, conference alignment seems like it comes up every other week. Is there a plan to keep, teams like Tulane, Memphis in the American? And what does that process look like when, teams want to leave or you're wanting to add teams? Just what's kind of your overall philosophy on conference realignment?
Well, guys, listen, I've never been in a commission. I had one commissioner job before this. I was a commissioner of a youth football league in northern Oakland, New Jersey, and I managed little kids, so it doesn't really count. But I haven't done this for that long. And at the same time, I was an athletic director for a brief period of time at my alma mater where I played football at Rutgers, and I was able to bring them into the Big Ten Conference. And I worked on the media side, on the buy side at networks where, I participated in sort of the media partners coming in to reset on realignment once it was done. So I've seen it from a lot of different angles. As a commissioner, it's totally different. You have to spend a lot of your time on trying to create more value and more resources for your institutions every single day. Because here's the reality, and I told everyone that was involved the last time around 8 weeks ago in the most recent expansion gate, that you have a choice as a commissioner. You can either really sell all the time about why it's a great place, which it is, and I think people know that or they wouldn't be here. Or you could do some of that, but make sure you're presenting your members with facts and actual outcomes. Like, that's part of the process. What I didn't want to happen with the last round of expansion was I didn't want our institutions ill-informed about what the real world would be. Because in a lot of cases, expansion proposals are built on speculation in the future. So it starts with that. You have to be a partner to your schools. You can't just be selling all the time. You have to present them facts and actual outcomes, and that's what we did. The second part of it is you have to build. And the hard part of building is college athletics lacks some unity right now. And when you lack unity, you're playing defense all the time, and it is harder to build. So the way, Jeff, that I'm focused on trying to convince our institutions to be in this for the long haul is we're building the commercial enterprise around what we do and trying to create more resources. We've had a countless number of private capital and private equity meetings about infusing capital investment to give schools more resources to build value. We have our conference naming rights in the market. We are talking about the future of the jersey patch and how the legislation moves and how that works. We're looking at other commercial opportunities beyond that. Our goal is to try to increase an influx of revenue to be able to give schools more resources to invest in the future, because they're facing more than they ever have with House and with NIL and the transfer portal. Like there's so much weighing down on administrators. So that's really what we're doing. But we're not going to tell them not to talk to anybody else. I encouraged our institutions to have those conversations. Was I a little bit nervous during the process at times? I mean, I might have been. I tried not to show it, but I might have been. But you have to be a partner to your institutions, because I remember what it was like to be an AD. Your job is to do what's best for your institution. But if you're going to be in a conference, you have to get all in and create unity in that conference to build something. And by the way, building, as you guys know from building your show, it doesn't happen overnight.
Tim, when those conversations start happening, or there's rumors or speculation about typically what we've seen is Memphis to the Big 12 or to the Big 12, or anybody that's on the Atlantic going to the Pac-12 or something random like that. When those conversations happen, are you in your mind and with your team starting to think about, okay, who are we going to add if we do lose somebody, or if we don't lose somebody, do we expand? What type of programs is the American Conference looking at?
So the answer to your question is, I almost, compare it, Matt, to if you're an athletic director and you have a great coach, if you're smart, you have a list of other coaches in your drawer to be ready for that coach to move on to something else. It's the exact same way when you're thinking about expansion. You have to identify first, not schools. And I started to do this actually when I was interviewing back in March and April. You have to set criteria first, because if the American Conference wanted to get bigger just to get bigger, there's opportunities out there for us. But in my mind, it starts with setting a criteria like, who are we? What's the DNA of the conference? What is the right institution as it relates to academic fit, the profile, the footprint? Are they investing in athletics at a level that's acceptable? Do they have the ability to bring the entire university and athletics together, to bring the power of that together? We have a long list of criteria before a school ever goes on the list. So we have been methodical about it. At times like this in the past, 8 weeks ago, I think every conference, if that happened 5 years ago, everybody'd be trying to add. But what we did was we took a lot of phone calls. And what I tell you about expansion is you have a responsibility to your conference to take every phone call. Even if you see so-and-so from such and such school and you're never going to do that, you take the call, because the relationships are important. There's a lot of information out there being shared, which is also important. But we have a list all the time, but we have criteria. And any move that we may make in the future will be a result of sort of like a deep data-driven drive on what makes the most sense, because we're going to be selective. The second thing is, adding is not necessarily adding. The one thing that we've said from the beginning, and I've only been here about 5.5 months, is if there are expansion opportunities that are accretive in value for the American, we will look at those opportunities, because what we don't want to do is dilute our membership. Like, that's not a reality anymore with everything that we're facing. So yeah, we have a list in the drawer. We have criteria. We're constantly having conversations with everyone, but we will be very, very selective. Like, this is a great and unique place that has cemented itself in a very unique position. And we're not satisfied with just being there. But in order to rise and elevate, we need to be very careful and specific about what we're looking for.
Well, throughout the country, football and men's basketball are really your two revenue drivers for universities. And it seems like the Big Ten and the SEC are kind of the drivers of everything that's been going on. Do you talk with the other commissioners, in the Mountain West and Conference USA, or is it more of kind of every conference for themselves as far as what you want to get done, or what kind of to have a voice amongst that group?
So, Jeff, I think it's a little bit of both. Quite frankly, what happens is we're all in the room together at the CFP meetings, and you look around the room, and what I do know about those meetings is you have some really committed people that are focused on trying to create the best possible experience and the best possible enterprise. And the thing that upsets me a little bit sometimes, and this is not about people, it's about the industry, is like when I was younger, my dad passed away when I was younger, and football was my path to college. And we couldn't afford it for me at the time that I went. It was my path to college. And I understood the mission of collegiate athletics from day one. It was education through sport. Like I used this football thing as a vehicle to get an education. That is still what it is, but it's kind of over there and it's kind of a little blurry and people aren't really paying attention to it. Okay. But commissioners are talking to each other about all of these matters. We're talking about house. We're talking about roster limits. We're talking about trying to bring the patchwork of state laws together into some sort of federally legislated NIL, parameters. So it's clear to everybody. So states are not taking it upon themselves to do it differently. And by the way, creating recruiting advantages as part of the process. So commissioners are talking about everything. At the same time, when you retreat from the table or you get on a plane, you head back, your job is to do what's best by your conference. But the football bowl subdivision group is working really, really hard in that room on the future of collegiate athletics, and not just football. It's basketball. It's Olympic sports. Like if you look at what happened in expansion the last time around, our institutions that decided to stay in the conference led their joint statement with student athlete welfare. And I was really I hate to sound like a dad. I am one to kids, but I hate to sound like a dad. I was kind of proud of our conference at that moment because that is not a popular topic anymore. It's not. That should be the lead in the conversation. It shouldn't be the TV revenue and the media partnership and the money and then student athlete welfare. Like that has to be the lead dog in these things. So for me, when I came into the room, I knew every commissioner in the room already from my years in television and on campuses. And it was great. Like Tony Petitti, I worked across the hall from him when I was a 24-year-old TV executive at ABC Sports when the guy created the BCS. He was an innovative guy then, and he maintains that. And I knew, Commissioner Sankey and Brett Yormark worked on a naming rights deal with me when I was at Rutgers, and he was, at BSE. So I had relationships going in. That really was a huge advantage for me because you're able to sort of get right to the table and talk about what's facing the industry. So I think people are working together. At times they're working independently, but they can't forget. We can't forget. This thing has become this monster because whether commissioners agree or disagree, for years they moved the enterprise forward together, and that creates accretive value for everyone.
So what's your seeing the future? What's your best guess on a lot of people want, a lot of people don't want, but think it's going to happen anyway, a separation between, this group of five or these super conferences, or is there going to be a sort of a litmus test of revenue sharing and what you're able to commit to? I guess give us your crystal ball on that.
Yeah. So, I made it a habit a long time ago, Matt, not to carry a crystal ball around because, if somebody sees you carrying it around, they assume you have all the answers. If I could answer those questions, I think I'd have a different job, right? But I think there's a few things you can predict. So one of the things that we're working on as a conference is we know there is something coming down the pike with House and how it's going to be resolved. And there's going to need to be more investment in the benefits to student athletes. It's a great time to be a student athlete and that there's more benefits. It's also I don't know about you guys, you both played football at Middle Tennessee State. I'm not sure being a student athlete in this day and age is easy. No, especially not. With social media and everything else. You can't make a mistake. You can't say anything wrong anymore. It's challenging. But what we know as a conference is we see the American in a different tier. We are going to set a minimum investment threshold in our conference for all the new benefits, meaning that the expectation for all of our members is that they're going to invest at a minimum level in all these new benefits. And if you have the ability and the resources to invest above the minimum level, then you have the opportunity, to do that as well. I think that's something that is coming. Like, I know we're doing it. I see others doing it. The autonomy conferences, I think, have already made a decision to go to the full cap in revenue sharing. But we're going to send a message that if you're going to be a member of this league, you're going to invest at a minimum level. And we're going to be serious about providing these benefits and making it an attractive place. As far as the future goes, here's what I would say. And I love that you guys both played because you'll understand this. The romantic side of me doesn't see a split of college football as a great result. It doesn't. And if you take the NCAA tournament as an example, why do we love the NCAA tournament? Because a school from down the street where I grew up in New Jersey, Fairleigh Dickinson, can make a run and beat some big guys in the tournament. St. Peter's can do it. Loyola Chicago can do it. Butler can do it. That's why we love the NCAA tournament. Now, the likelihood of that happening in football is probably less. But if you start to divide, you send a very strong statement about the state of affairs, that there's no unity. I think the best case scenario is that college football is a single entity. And I've heard about these proposals, and I've actually talked to some people that are involved with them to sort of understand what everybody's thinking about the future. What people don't understand, and I worked on the media side, so I had that perspective, is everybody's out there getting their rights deal, and the investments are big. If college football came together and sold college football as a single seller to the marketplace, that's really the only true opportunity you have to really maximize its value. Having said all that, the FBS staying together and moving the enterprise forward together, I think, is the best result. But all of these proposals some are radical, some are controversial. Like, I'm good with that. I think we should be talking about change. And that is the one thing that the industry resists. Like, there's not a lot of interest in talking about change. And I think it's time to do it. It doesn't mean you're going to change, but let's talk about it a little bit, because maybe there's some things in there that can be answered that we can't currently answer in the current structure. So I've tried to encourage people to, like, hey, let's talk about it. Like, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's tear down the walls. Let's lose, any agendas that anybody has, and let's talk about change.
Well, it seems like next year, everything's kind of going in-house, I believe, in July. Do you think there's still a role with NIL collectives, or is it all just going to be ran through the institutions at this point?
Good questions. I for one, and then again, Jeff, this is just one person's opinion. I don't see the collectives going away. And, while there may be some chatter about that within the context of the settlement, and I have no information to support this, I'm sure it's being discussed. But put yourself in the president or athletic director's seat right now, and say you have the resources to share revenue at a high level. Your ability to continue to operate in conjunction with your collective gives you the ability to be additive and additive and additive. So I don't know that I see them going away. And there's two kinds of collectives, at least in my experience. One are collectives that are working in lockstep with the athletic department and the university, trying to help it achieve its bigger goals in raising money. And then there are others that have used the opportunity to get direct access to student athletes. And I think some of those could be dangerous, because NIL aside, student athletes, my concern is they're out there without enough education and without enough guardrails. And I'm not advocating for reining in NIL. I think it's great that student athletes have the ability to monetize their name, image, and likeness. They should have that opportunity. My concern is we need to make sure that they're educated at the highest level to understand entering into a relationship. Who are the people? What does it mean? What does the contract say? What are the long-term tax implications? Like, there are more questions that need to be asked than how much. Yeah. And that's where I think we need to put our focus. But I think collectives, the collectives that have done it the right way have played an important role in a period of time where there's a lot of uncertainty. And you also know there's a lot of high-powered, high net worth influential people involved with collectives, if there's an effort made to move them on, I think some people are going to have a lot to say about that.
Jeff, unless you have any other NIL questions, I was going to go to the Twitter questions that we got. And I hate to do this.
Twitter questions. Whoa, you guys didn't disclose we have Twitter questions.
Yeah, and I hate to tell you, but a vast majority of them had to do with officiating across college football in general. So I guess it's funny. I was talking to somebody at my my real job today about it, and we were sitting there talking about, Matt, these guys are part-time. They got new rules every week, it seems like, and they got to deal with social media too, where they make a even questionable call, and you see, Utah's athletic director immediate post game. What's your message, either A, to the fans, or how can we make officiating better, or is it just relax? They're doing the best they can.
I'm happy to answer that question. It's a really good one. It's got to be the hardest job in the world.
Yeah.
And I was saying this too. I was at a game this weekend, and I was saying this to one of our athletic directors. I said, when you're having the worst day you could possibly have, think about how hard it is to be these guys.
Yeah.
Because you cannot win. There is no perfect game that's ever been officiated. They are human beings. And even with I think the psychology of the fan is, well, they got replay. I mean, how could they screw it? You know what? Not everything is going to be right. It's just human nature. That's the way it is. So every game, I've gotten into this new habit, and I'm out every weekend at a game, sometimes at multiple. I like to get out to the field an hour before the game so I can talk to the officials, because we have great crews of officials. I've enjoyed getting to know them. I want them to know that we support them and we care about them, because I don't think they hear a lot of it. My line with all of them always is, hey guys, just wanted to come over here and say hello before you start getting yelled at. Right? Because it's a hard job. But the state of officiating is, it's what it's going to be. What I know is I have officials that, while the hurricanes were hitting the East Coast, that drove 12 and 15 hours overnight to get to their games. These are dedicated people that care about what they do. They work their rear ends off, and it's a hard job. And they are always the subject of hatred, venom, like whatever you want to call it. But I know how hard they work. And just to tell you a personal story, my younger son, Max, played high school basketball in New Jersey, and I'm a photographer by hobby. And I used to be sitting on the floor taking pictures, and I was close to officials, and I was so fascinated with how hard it was. So when he was done, I did the officiating courses and training and became an official in New Jersey in basketball. And here's what I'll tell you. There is so much stuff you have to remember in a split second that you can't get wrong. And it really gave me a different perspective. And by the way, I'm not interested in even doing that in my retirement. Okay. But I thought it was important for me, being in this business, just to have that perspective. So what I'd say to the fans is, they're an easy target, but it's an impossible job. And I would love for every fan to have the opportunity to be shadowing an official during a game to understand how challenging it is. Like, we should be grateful for these guys.
Yeah.
Having said that, when I was an AD at Rutgers, and you live and die with it, every single play, you live and die with it, I can understand how coaches and administrators may react at certain times, because like the result is the future, right? Your job could depend on it. The fundraising could depend on it. Your ability to hire a coach could depend on it. Building a new stadium could depend on it. Whether you can get from your house to pick up the newspaper and your safety depends on it. So you can understand how people react in a moment like that, but it's because it's just so meaningful. Like, this is something I think that pro sports will never have.
Yeah.
I like to be shadowing that Big 12 crew in the Tulane Kansas State game, though.
I was just gonna say.
What are your thoughts on those guys?
Now listen, the one thing I'll never do, and we had something this weekend in one of our games with another conference's officials, is there is no value in going out there and reliving something that maybe could have been done better, that's not going to change the result. And I don't think anybody in the industry or fans or anybody else or you guys, everybody always says the same thing. Well, you don't want the officials to decide the game. But whenever there's a call that's controversial, everybody narrows their focus to that play.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you guys know this, you played football. There's hundreds of plays in the game.
Yeah.
Right. So the likelihood that one changes the outcome is very unlikely.
But boy, that was a big one.
Boy, that one was rough.
That was a tough one.
That was.
Listen, if off the air, I'll tell you how I really feel about that, because I know how important it was for our conference and for Tulane.
Yeah.
But having said that, and that guy, Coach Summerall, like, there's not a better guy in
He's
better
the best
person in our league. And you saw how he handled it, which is, this is a game where there's hundreds of plays. But sometimes when it's close to the end, the focus is on one thing that could make or break it. But you guys know this better than anybody. It does come down to a handful of plays, but it's very rarely one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said it spot on. I mean, not to rehash it, but if that goes the other way, we're probably having a debate right now of one lost Boise State or one lost Tulane or undefeated, who's ranked number 12 versus who's, fighting to crack the top 25. Sorry to.
But it didn't, Matt. So let's get on to the next Twitter question.
That's all right.
Jeff, what else you got for him?
Man, he hit everything nail on the head, in my opinion. We appreciate you coming on, Tim. It was awesome.
Guys, this is great. And, like I said to you off the air, I really wish you well. I admire how much focus and energy you're putting on this part of college football and collegiate athletics. I think it has a lot to do with where you came from and what your own experience was. But I wanted you to know, when I reached out to you that day on that DM, I wanted you to know that we appreciated what you're doing. And I really feel lucky to have been the first commissioner to come on. And when things get slow, don't hesitate to call me again.
Love it. And
Absolutely.
we're behind the scenes. Jeff and I are hoping for some outcomes that would allow for us to travel to your championship game. But we got to see what shakes out and, how easy the travel is going to be for us. But
all right, well, you've said that on the air, and if you guys get stuck and need a ride, you know who to call. All right.
I'll call the officiating crew and see if they're willing to carpool for 15 hours to West
Listen, you
Point.
really want to learn about officials? Carpool with those guys. That's a great way to get to know them. So.
Well, Tim, we cannot thank you enough for coming on. And honest to God, I mean, it means a ton, everything that you've said and you reaching out and all that stuff. So we can't thank you enough for coming on. And we wish the American Conference as a whole good luck the rest of the way. And hopefully we get a couple of group of 5 teams in this playoff.
We're rooting for it. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
See you, Tim. Well, I'm bought in on the American, Jeff. Normally I'm all bought in on the coaches and the programs, but I mean, he's only been in that role since I think like June or July, right? This summer, when he took over that role. But it's great to see that perspective, right? And he's been all over the country. AD, played at Rutgers, been in multiple conferences, etc. And you love that perspective, man.
Well, it's such a unique perspective that we haven't had the opportunity, to get and to talk to. So we appreciate Tim coming on, but such a I'm finding a trend here, Sprouse, with certain people that are in certain positions of leadership. And man, like when you meet people and talk to guys that get it, like you immediately can tell that he's a leader. He's got a plan. He's like used all of his past knowledge from being a player, from being an AD, from being in the media side of things. Like home run for the American. I mean, absolute home run. And I love his answer on, how to kind of keep the American together. Like his job is to these universities and to keep them, happy and to give them as many, as much resources as possible to build the American. And that's what we've always talked about when you get in the conference realignment is like, why don't be so quick to jump to the Pac-2? Like you don't know what that TV deal is going to be. It's going down the road. Like, why not invest in the American, build the American, and make it the best freaking conference in the country with the best media deal you can get?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. That was my main takeaway is a lot of these conferences are selling on hypotheticals, and that's exactly what the Pac-2 was doing. And that's exactly why your top tier American schools made their joint statement like they did. And I'll tell you, man, I enjoy the perspective of, yeah, man, go make the phone call, have the conversation. I'm not not offended by that. And I've got a plan, and you have every right to know what's out there for you. And I think you can take that same perspective to a player, whether it be NIL or, a coach for a contract. Sure. I mean, you ought to know what's available, and then you ought to be able to make the best decision that benefits, if you're an athletic director, your athletic program and your university. If you're a player, what benefits you, your family, as well as your team. So I think there's lessons in all of that at every level, from a conference level to an athletic program level to a football program, a team level, and then down all the way down to the individual players and coaches.
Yeah. Well, you got your answer on Army Navy, pal.
Yeah, I disagree. He caught me off guard when he made me give my argument.
That was good.
I can appreciate that.
No, I thought you made a good argument. But I also I got his answer too. Like I get both sides, but I think the route they chose to take was smart. Let's keep it the way it is for now. I don't think they probably anticipated in year one it being the way that it is. And honestly, like, we may not have to deal with it. You know what I mean? So like, until we cross that bridge, we'll deal with it then. And I respect that. That's probably the smartest way to go about it.
Well, and I think when you would see a change, I think it would be outside pressure if the situation, like he said, happened. If you have, let's just use Army, for example. Let's say Army beats Notre Dame, beats Tulane or whoever in the American Championship, and loses to Navy and gets a playoff spot. I think that's when you'll start seeing the Mountain West or the Sun Belt, or even, who's your 13th team that missed out, saying, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. They didn't play again. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think that's when you might see a change, when that pressure comes from the outside. Because right now it's all, I mean, I don't really know who's putting pressure on it. Nobody, me, I guess. Maybe I'm the only one. I don't know. I thought I was in the majority.
There. Yeah. No.
But anyway, man, can't thank Tim enough. Can't thank everybody for making it happen. Annie and Chuck, who we've kind of coordinated this time slot with. Shout out to them. Shout out to the whole conference. And hopefully we see you somewhere for the championship game.
It's going to be epic.
But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Make sure you catch our show every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, live at 6 a.m. Eastern. You get us for about an hour, sometimes a little bit more, where we break down games, talk about hot topics, headlines, news stories. We'll play your voicemails. If you haven't listened to the show before, we'll play voicemails where you call the hotline. Make sure you follow us on all the social platforms at Group of Five Guys, and subscribe to the channel, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your best podcast, or you can download the Varsity app for free. Listen to the show on there.